On September 7th, 1996, rap icon Tupac Shakur was killed in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. The murder occurred at 11:15 p.m. when the Black BMW carrying Tupac and the Death Row label boss Suge Knight stopped at a red light at East Flamingo Road in Koval. Shots came from a white Cadillac with 4 assailants, all members of the Southside Crips. Tupac died from his wounds 6 days later on September 13th. But what was the reason they killed him, and was Diddy the mastermind behind it? To answer these questions, we must go back several years and examine the West Coast and East Coast hip-hop rivalry. In this video, we'll look at the key events, the people involved, and the rumours of Diddy's involvement. Sean Puffy Combs, now known as P. Diddy or Diddy, was the boss of New York record company Bad Boy Entertainment, which at the time of the shooting was Tupac's biggest enemy. Pac himself was signed to Death Row Records, which was owned by Suge Knight. Suge and Diddy had a long-standing rivalry, one that is central to this story. The Bloods and the Crips have a rivalry that goes back decades, and during the 90s, where this story takes place, they were mortal enemies. Of the 4 men involved in Tupac's death, the only surviving shooter is Keefe D. He knew Suge Knight since they were both kids growing up in Compton. Keefe D was involved in gang life from a young age, and he became a member of the Southside Crips. Suge Knight, on the other hand, wasn't a member of any particular gang, but he grew up in a Blood area, around Blood members. Nevertheless, they were both friends and played football together. Suge was a talented football player, and he played while he attended college in Las Vegas. Years later, he would open the 662 Club in Vegas, where Tupac was headed before he got shot. While Suge was playing football at college, Keefe D was being a gangbanger in Compton. Suge wasn't seen as a gangbanger, so Keefe D never saw him as any kind of threat. He was just the dude he grew up with. But when Suge failed to make it as a pro football player, he moved back to Compton, and he joined a Blood set, specifically the Mob Pirus. In 1990, Suge founded the record label Death Row Records with help from Keefe D, who put up some money. At this point, they were friends and business partners. When NWA was blowing up, Suge wanted Eazy-E to sign with Death Row, but Eazy-E rejected the offer, preferring to stick with his own label, Ruthless. This didn't go down well with Suge, and he called Keefe D, attempting to get Dr. Dre's number. Dr. Dre and the DOC, members of NWA, felt that they were underpaid and undervalued in NWA and wanted to leave. They were intrigued by Death Row Records, and Suge tried to help them get out of their contracts with Ruthless. Dr. Dre set Eazy up when he asked to meet with him to discuss their contracts. But when Eazy-E arrived for the meeting, Dre wasn't there. Instead, Eazy-E was met by Suge Knight, who proceeded to intimidate Eazy-E, trying to get him to sign paperwork to release Dr. Dre and the DOC from their contracts. But Eazy-E signed his name with a fake signature. Since Eazy-E was a Compton Crip, he was supported by the Crips. Suge Knight naturally became their enemy, and Eazy-E himself wanted to kill Suge, believing that he was going to become a big problem for him. But he was talked out of it by Jerry Heller, Eazy-E's manager. Keefe D tried to remain neutral. Suge had always shown him respect, and they were childhood friends, but this friendship would soon come to an end when Keefe D and Suge felt increasingly disrespected by the other. Keefe D and Diddy first met in 1991. Keefe D was supplying drugs from the West to affiliates in the East, and Diddy resided on the East and met Keefe D through one of those affiliates called Von Zip. Suge Knight also knew Diddy, and they were friends. Suge was powerful, and Death Row was hugely successful, with both Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg signed to the label. At this time, Diddy was a rising star and a small fish, not Suge's competitor, so they were cool. Diddy's label, Bad Boy, was in its infancy, and Suge often helped Diddy out whenever he could. But this situation would eventually turn sour when Diddy signed one of the most popular rap superstars of the 90s, Notorious B.I.G., known as Biggie. In 1994, Biggie released his debut album, Ready to Die, on Bad Boy Records, and it was a huge hit. Suddenly, Death Row Records on the West and Bad Boy Records on the East became rivals. The situation quickly worsened when Suge wanted Biggie to perform at a venue he was promoting, but Diddy wanted Suge to pay. This enraged Suge, who had looked out for Diddy and helped him out, but Diddy wouldn't budge and wouldn't do it for free. This created tension between them, and Suge wanted to get revenge. He wanted to prove to Diddy that Death Row was still number one, and he wouldn't get away with disrespecting him. He quickly started looking for a new artist who would outperform Biggie, and his eyes set upon Tupac. Unfortunately, Tupac was in jail at the time, so instead Suge wanted to steal Diddy's artists who were signed to Bad Boy, including Biggie. He planned to do this through an East Coast department for Death Row Records. He also planned to sign all talented artists on the East Coast before Diddy could, to drive him out of business. At this point, with the beef ramped up, it was too dangerous for Diddy to go to LA without adequate protection. But Suge Knight had at least 50 gang members with him at all times, ready to kill on command. Diddy couldn't afford 50 bodyguards a day every time he went to LA, so instead, he did what Suge did. He recruited gang members to protect him, only he recruited members of the Crips, enemies of Suge and the Bloods. Diddy called up Von Zip, the drug affiliate who introduced him to Keefy D, and requested help. At this time, the Crips were still upset with Suge for what he did to Eazy-E, who had now passed away from AIDS. And Suge was a mob pyro, so hating him was easy. They also hated everyone associated with him, including artists like Snoop Dogg, who was a Crip, but was now seen as a traitor. So they didn't find it difficult to get support from the Crips. Suge was trying to intimidate Diddy every chance he got, showing up at every performance or event where Diddy was. Keefy D told Diddy to get him 50 tickets to his shows, and he would make sure the Southside Crips were there to protect him. But Keefy D said he didn't think Suge would ever do anything violent. Since they were childhood friends, Keefy D never saw Suge as a gangbanger. He didn't think he had it in him, so he wasn't really taking this rivalry seriously. And he had no idea that Suge was actually a member of the Mob Pyros. Keefy D thought Diddy was just another way for him and the Crips to make some money, and maybe open some doors for them in the music industry. He didn't really support Diddy, he just wanted to make some cash. The feud ramped up when Suge and his crew arrived at a club in Atlanta where Diddy was hanging out. Diddy was alerted that Suge was outside, so he went out there and it escalated into an argument. Next thing that happened, one of Suge's friends, Big Jake, got shot. Diddy claimed he didn't see the incident because his back was turned and he had nothing to do with it. When Big Jake was lying on the ground dying, Suge got in Diddy's face and shouted at him, telling him he was going to do everything he could to get him. We still don't know who the shooter was, but witnesses have said it was one of Diddy's bodyguards known as Wolf. 3 weeks later, on October 12, 1995, Tupac was released from jail. He immediately signed with Death Row Records and became more successful than any artist on the East Coast. He had dethroned Biggie as the king of rap, and Suge Knight was laughing all the way to the bank. But let's back up a second. Tupac was actually shot in another incident before the one that killed him. On 30th of November 1994, in the lobby of the Quad Recording Studios in New York, Tupac was confronted by 3 armed men who shot and robbed him. He was shot in the legs, groin and hands. Tupac believed that Biggie and Diddy were responsible. So when Tupac was released from jail almost a year later, he signed to Death Row and was fully on Suge's side, wanting his own revenge on Diddy. They both hit Biggie and Diddy where it hurt most, their relationships. Faith Evans, Biggie's wife, flew out to LA to record a song with Tupac. Witnesses said she sat on Tupac's lap in the recording studio and went to his hotel room together. Faith Evans denies this, but did say that Tupac pressured her into giving him oral sex. After this, Suge Knight started sleeping with Diddy's ex, who he had a child with. They were seen together on numerous occasions. Allegedly, Tupac also slept with Mary J. Blige, who was signed to Bad Boy Records. Suge and Tupac were playing dirty and rubbing it in their faces. But Tupac also rubbed the Southside Crips the wrong way with his song California Love, released in 1995. In the song is the line, "Let them recognize from Long Beach to Rosecrans." This is within the area where Suge's blood gang, the Mob Pyru, represented, essentially telling the Southside Crips they better recognize who they're dealing with. While Tupac wasn't a member of any gang, he had many friends who were Crips, but he fell out with almost all of them after he got closer to Suge Knight and more affiliated with the Mob Pyrus. He frequently referenced the mob, or MOB, in his songs, and it was clear whose side he was on. The Soul Train Awards show was held on March 13, 1995 at the Shrine Auditorium in LA. Biggie opened the show, but this annoyed Suge Knight and Tupac. They felt that because the awards show was on their territory, they should open. Suge's plan was to have Mob Piru members attack Biggie on stage, but they were late and didn't arrive until after his performance. Diddy was also there, as well as a bunch of Crips and Keefe D. Concerned for their safety, Biggie, Diddy and their team exited the awards show as soon as they could, leaving through the back where they wouldn't be seen. But someone inside, allegedly an LAPD officer working for Suge, tipped off Suge and Tupac. So when Biggie was leaving through the back, he came face to face with Tupac and the Pirus. An argument ensued and guns were drawn. Tupac told them to shoot, which scared Diddy, who ran off. Biggie stood his ground. Luckily, the argument broke up and everyone dispersed after people from inside the building came out and talked everyone down. That night, Biggie and his team got on a flight to North Carolina where they had a show to perform, but Diddy didn't go with them. He tried calling Biggie, but he ignored him, mad at Diddy for running off and leaving him there. Diddy said that the reason he ran is because he had employees who depended on him for their livelihood. He was also concerned about his image, and he didn't want to come across as a gangbanger to white people. He didn't want to appear associated with guns or gangs. He allegedly told one of his team that he didn't care if Biggie had to die or Tupac had to die, but something had to change. But things would get worse for Diddy. Tupac released a diss track called Hit 'Em Up on June 4th, 1996, in which he mocked Diddy running away, joked about sleeping with Biggie's wife, and threatening violence against them. This song was a pivotal moment in the feud because Tupac said things in which he couldn't take back. His threats of violence were clear. The final straw was when pictures emerged of Tupac and Faith Evans, which caused Biggie's relationship with her to break down. She said she cheated on him to get revenge on him for cheating on her. Pictures of Suge with Diddy's baby mama also emerged, and some pictures showed them together with Diddy's son. This seemed to hurt Diddy a lot because he ended up in hospital with a cut on his arm. Some people said he tried to kill himself, but Diddy claimed it was an accident from a broken champagne bottle. Either way, Diddy said he was ready for the feud to end. It seemed that he had had enough. According to Keefe D, he met up with Diddy at Greenblatt's Deli on Sunset Boulevard in LA. It was here that Diddy allegedly offered Keefe D and the Southside Crips $1 million to kill Suge Knight and Tupac. Keefe D said it wasn't a problem and they would get it done. Diddy denies this event took place and denies ever soliciting murder, but Keefe D said there was a number of Crips in the room who were witnesses to Diddy asking him to kill Suge. According to Keefe D, he thought he and Diddy were business partners, equals, but Diddy only saw Keefe D as a pawn in his game, someone he could use to do his dirty work and then distance himself from. Keefe D said Diddy's main target was Suge. Suge was the one with the power, the one who stole his girl, the one who tried to destroy his business, the one who made it impossible for him to perform on the West Coast. Suge was the one he wanted gone. Tupac was collateral damage. Both Keefe D and the Southsiders and Suge, Tupac, Snoop Dogg and the Death Row crew planned to go to the Mike Tyson-Bruce Seldon fight at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas on September 7th. Tupac didn't want to go initially. He had a tight schedule and a family matter he wanted to attend to in Atlanta. But Suge convinced him to go. He planned for Tupac to perform at the 662 Club after the fight. On September 7th, 1996, about 100 people from Death Row Records, including Suge and Tupac, drove to Las Vegas. They checked in at the Luxor Hotel around 3 p.m. That same day, Terrence Brown, a Southside Crip, hired a white Cadillac from an Enterprise car rental service in LA. He and Orlando Anderson and DeAndre Smith drove to Las Vegas to meet with Keefe D. That night, Tupac spent time at the casino of the MGM Grand. Due to miscommunications, only one bodyguard was with him, despite there being more than 20 Southsider Crips in the building. Anything could have happened to him. He was waiting for Suge and his gang to show up, because they had the tickets to the fight. According to Keefe D, the Crips weren't there to start anything. They were just there to watch the boxing and enjoy themselves. Eventually, Suge and the Mob Pirus showed up. They also had people at the 662 Club ready and waiting. Tupac had recorded a tribute song for Mike Tyson, which was played when Tyson entered the ring. The Southsiders heard the lyrics, which mentioned Tupac and the Death Row gang going to the 662 Club after the fight. They knew exactly where Tupac would be once the fight was over. But the fight didn't last long. Tyson knocked out Selden in the first round. After the fight, Tupac was in an excited and energetic mood. Around 8:45 p.m, he came out of the arena and was talking with reporters about the fight. Meanwhile, Orlando Anderson, a Southside Crip and Keefe D's nephew, was standing in the lobby near the food court. Since the Southsiders' seats in the arena were all spread out, they planned to meet inside the food court after the fight. Perhaps Orlando thought they meant at the entrance to the food court, but he was standing around when someone from the Death Row gang spotted him. They told Tupac and Suge, who started hustling towards him, thinking Orlando and the Southsiders were there to get them. Tupac punched Orlando in the face, then he, Suge and others started beating him right there in the arena lobby. Tupac's bodyguards tried to break up the fight and were assisted by hotel security. Orlando managed to avoid severe injuries by covering his head in the attack. At 8:55 p.m, Tupac, Suge and the Death Row gang left the MGM Grand. Tupac went back to the Luxor Hotel where he was staying and got changed for his performance at the 662 Club. Meanwhile, Keefe D and the Southsiders were still waiting for Orlando Anderson and were soon informed by another Crip of the fight that just happened. Keefe D was really mad. Orlando was his nephew, so he took it personally. He was also mad that he had helped Suge finance Death Row Records, and now Suge was biting the hand that fed him. Orlando wanted immediate revenge, and Keefe D felt it was time to act. He and the Crips knew the Death Row guys were going to be at the 662 Club. They had been talking about it for weeks. Tupac and Suge Knight rode together in a black BMW. Tupac's bodyguard, Frank Alexander, wanted to ride with them, but Tupac told him to drive the Lexus and be the designated driver for their friends. Frank had a bad feeling about it, and he also didn't have his gun with him. He had left it in another vehicle and didn't have time to get it. Suge and Tupac first drove to Suge's mansion so he could get changed and they could talk privately. Everyone else waited outside the house while Tupac and Suge went inside. Meanwhile, Keefe D, Orlando Anderson and the Southsiders jumped in their vehicles and headed to the 662 Club. They were armed and ready. Orlando was hell-bent on getting revenge. He couldn't let Tupac disrespect him and his gang. He had his reputation to uphold. Something had to happen. They drove in 3 cars to the 662 Club and parked in a nearby parking lot. The place was crawling with bloods. They waited in silence for an hour. Tupac, Suge and the rest of the Death Row gang were now on their way to the 662 Club at 1700 East Flamingo Road. The drive was about 30 minutes. But Keefe D got tired of waiting. He ordered his gang to leave, telling them Tupac and Suge were taking too long and they should go have some fun. So they left. After all, they had come to Vegas to party, and they didn't want to miss that. They stopped at a liquor store on their way to their hotel to stock up. After leaving the liquor store, Keefe D decided to jump in the front passenger seat of the white Cadillac, next to the driver, Terrence Brown. In the back seat was DeAndre Smith and Orlando Anderson. On the way to the Carriage Hotel where they planned to party, the white Cadillac drove in front with the following 2 cars stopping at a red light behind them, so the Cadillac went on ahead without them. Meanwhile, Suge and Tupac were driving in the black BMW in the opposite direction towards the 662 Club. But they got pulled over by a cop on a bicycle who told them their stereo was too loud. He also noted that the car didn't have correct plates. After a brief conversation, the officer let them go without a ticket, so they continued on. They turned onto Flamingo Road, where Keefe D in the white Cadillac was waiting at a traffic light, and Keefe D saw them. They saw Tupac standing with his body out of the sunroof, facing a car full of women behind them. These women had recognized Tupac when the cops stopped them, and he invited them to follow them to the 662 Club. People on the streets were screaming Tupac's name. If Tupac hadn't been standing out of the sunroof, Keefe D would never have seen him, but he was drawing so much attention to himself, it was impossible not to. Terrence did a U-turn and started following Tupac and Suge. The black BMW came to a halt at the intersection of East Flamingo Road and Koval. The car was protected by death row members in front, in the lane to the left of it, and directly behind it. But the car with the women had gone on ahead, leaving a space to the BMW's right. The white Cadillac rolled up to the right side of the BMW, next to the passenger seat where Tupac was sitting. According to Keefe D, he and Suge locked eyes, and Tupac scrambled for a gun, so they shot at them in self-defense. But 13 shots were fired in total, with the first 3 bullet holes on the back door and the final bullet hole in the windshield. It looks as if the white Cadillac was moving past the BMW as the shots were fired. A bullet grazed Suge's head, and he ducked. Tupac tried to jump into the back seat as glass shards and bullets flew around him, but he couldn't, and he was hit in the chest. It's not clear who the shooter was, but most likely it was DeAndre Smith, sitting behind the driver on the left side. Terrence Brown had to drive, so it was unlikely to be him. Keefe D would have had to shoot past Terrence since he was on the right side in the front passenger seat. It's more likely that the shots came from the back, and DeAndre had the clearest shot. Keefe D has made conflicting statements about this, at one point saying Orlando was the shooter, and another time saying he didn't see who the shooter was because he was ducking. Frank Alexander, Tupac's bodyguard who was riding behind the BMW, said he saw a dark black arm come out of the back seat of the Cadillac. This description fits DeAndre Smith. But Orlando Anderson was the one who wanted revenge, so could he have reached past DeAndre Smith and shot them? It's still possible. The Southsiders managed to escape without the assailants being harmed. At this point, Tupac had been shot 5 times and he was bleeding out, but he was still awake. Suge started driving, saying he was going to take him to a hospital, but he started driving the wrong way. He ran red lights, hit the medians in the road and popped his tyres, but that didn't stop him from driving. Eventually, the car came to a halt. Police chased them and confronted them when Suge stepped out of the car. Suge started yelling that Tupac was shot, and the police told him to get on the ground. They weren't sure if they were the victims or the shooters. Frank Alexander came running over and told the cops he was Tupac's bodyguard. They tried to get him out of the car, but the door was jammed. Frank told the cops who Suge and Tupac were, so the cops allowed Suge to get up off the ground. He managed to get the door open, and they lifted Tupac out and onto the ground. He was struggling to breathe and covered in blood. The cop, Officer Chris Carroll, asked Tupac several times, "Who shot you?" But Tupac wouldn't or couldn't speak. He was struggling to breathe. Carroll asked him one more time, "Who shot you?" Tupac looked at him dead in the eye, took a deep breath, and said, "Fuck you." Even as he lay dying, Pac hated cops. An ambulance took Suge and Tupac to the hospital. Tupac was immediately taken into surgery and placed on a ventilator. 1 bullet had punctured his right lung and caused significant damage. He had significant internal bleeding. They had to remove the collapsed lung, and then he was placed in a medically induced coma. That night, Keefe D and the rest of the Southsiders joined the rest of their crew at the Carriage Hotel for a party. Keefe D said he didn't say a word about what had just happened because he was concerned that people would snitch. The cops began interviewing witnesses at the crime scene and brought members of the death row gang, including Frank Alexander, in for questioning, but they couldn't find the white Cadillac. The next day, the Southsiders drove back to Compton. Terrence Brown picked up the white Cadillac from where they'd hidden it and followed Keefe D and the others back to LA. They took the car to be repainted and cleaned before returning it to the Enterprise car rental. This meant any evidence was wiped clean. Meanwhile, police came to interview Suge at the hospital, but he told them to go away and come back later. The next day, on September 8th, he was discharged before police came back, and he headed back to Compton. He informed the mob Pyrus of what had happened and told them the Southsiders were responsible, igniting a gang war between several Pyru and Crip sets. There were mass shootings all over the neighborhood, and police raided over 40 houses, seizing weapons and arresting people. When learning about Tupac's death, Diddy was very happy. Keefe D ordered Von Zip, his drug affiliate, to get the $1 million from Diddy. 4 days after the shooting, Suge and his attorney finally met with police, but he told them he didn't see anything. He wouldn't give them anything, and didn't help the investigation. But a Mob Piru police informant told police that the Southsiders were responsible. On Friday, September 13th, 1996, Tupac died. Suge wasn't allowed to see him one last time before he passed because he wasn't a family member. He was cremated and his mother spread his ashes on a hill in LA. His family had a private funeral for him in Malibu. Orlando Anderson went into hiding while the Mob Pirus tried to find him. The police heard numerous tips that he was responsible for Tupac's death and began looking for him. They also began looking for Keefe D after being tipped off about his involvement. Keefe D also learned that there was a Mob Piru bounty on his head for $100,000. At this point, Keefe D managed to meet up with Von Zip to ask him about the $1 million payment from Diddy, but Von Zip told him that Diddy hadn't paid. Keefe D was skeptical after hearing from one of Diddy's associates that Von Zip had actually been paid. Additionally, Diddy's ex-bodyguard said he had seen the check himself. Keefe D was convinced that Von Zip had been paid but was hiding it from him to keep the money for himself. But Von Zip had been arrested in a narcotics raid, so he couldn't confront him about it. Suge continued to dodge police and refused to help them with the investigation into Tupac's death. As a result, rumors started circulating that Suge had planned it to prevent Tupac from leaving Death Row before his 3-album deal expired. If Tupac died while Death Row still owned the rights to his music, Suge could still collect money from his catalogue and release all of the unreleased songs that Tupac had recorded and make money off of those. Suge also had a number of LAPD officers working for him. They were crooked cops, and some of them were Bloods. They ended up paying Keefe D $60,000 to stop their hunt for Suge, which he did. The Southsiders then called off the gang war. Suge was arrested for violating probation. The video evidence of him kicking Orlando Anderson at the MGM Grand sealed the deal. Orlando testified for Suge during the trial, saying that he never kicked him, but the video evidence was clear. He was sentenced to 9 years. Keefe D and the Southsiders continued to protect Diddy whenever he came to the West. Suge was still sending people to antagonize Diddy while he was locked up. But as the cops increased their presence around the Southsiders, Diddy began to distance himself and denied ever using Crips as security. Keefe D said that he regretted ever meeting Diddy, that his life turned upside down after getting involved with him. Orlando Anderson was never charged with his involvement in Tupac's death, but he died in 1998 in a drug deal that went bad. He was drunk and confronted some gang members that owed Keefe D some money for cocaine. He shot at one of them, but ended up getting shot himself. Panicked, he drove off, but crashed his car and died. In 2004, DeAndre Smith, who was possibly the shooter in Tupac's murder, died of health-related issues. In September 2015, Terrence Brown, the driver of the white Cadillac, was shot to death inside a medical marijuana dispensary. That means that Keefe D is the only surviving assailant. And in 2023, police finally arrested him. He was indicted for the murder of Tupac after confessing in his book Compton Street Legend. He also confessed in multiple interviews. It's likely he'll spend the rest of his life in prison. Tupac's death was a shock to the rap community and the nation. He had already been shot 5 times and survived, but he wasn't invincible. He died young, like so many others involved in gang violence. As for Diddy, he is currently in jail on unrelated charges. He has always denied any involvement in Tupac's death. 6 months after Tupac died, Notorious B.I.G. was murdered in a similar drive-by shooting. Many people believe it was Suge's revenge.
I feel like, it's too much money here. I mean, nobody should be hitting lotto for $36 million and we got people starving in the streets. That is not idealistic. That's just real. That is just stupid. There's no way Michael Jackson should have, or whoever Jackson, should have $1 million, $1 billion, and then there's people starving. There's no way. There's no way that these people should own planes and their people don't have houses, apartments, shacks, drawers, pants. Can you imagine somebody having $32 million? 32. $32 million, and this person has nothing, and you can sleep, you can still go to the movies and then these are the type of people that get humanitarian awards. Millionaires. How can they be humanitarians? By the fact that they millionaires and there's so many poor people shows how unhumane they are. I know you're rich. I know you got $40 billion, but can you just keep it to one house? You only need one house. And if you only got 2 kids, can you just keep it to 2 rooms? I mean, why have 52 rooms and you know there's somebody with no room? It just don't make sense to me.